This next session is sort of this big catch-all of kind of the A to Z of project management. And so we have three awesome project manager practitioners here to share their experience, expertise, wisdom, anecdotes with you about managing these barrier removal projects. And I'm going to just introduce them all briefly, and then they can introduce themselves further and get us started off. So first we have Karina Dailey, who's a restoration ecologist for the Vermont Natural Resource Council, and also one of the co-hosts of this conference. And then we have Hilary Solomon, who is the director or the district manager for the Poultney Mettowee Natural Resource Conservation District and has been there since 2014. And for those of you who are in the funding session this morning, you've already heard from Rhodes. Rhodes, who is with the Connecticut River Conservancy and has been there since 2011 and has a lot of expertise and passion for barrier removal projects, particularly dam removal. So without further ado, I will pass it off to you guys.
Thanks, guys. Really exciting to be here. The last dam removal workshop in Vermont was in 2010. I was not a part of it, but 14 years later, here we are. So really exciting, and the interest was tremendous. So I do hope we keep this momentum going and continue this great work. I'm Karina Dailey. I'm a restoration ecologist with Vermont Natural Resources Council, and I sort of have a three-part job, and I like to explain it that way. I manage the dam removal projects that I can't help have other people take on, so I kind of take on the orphan dams. But really my job is to help other organizations take on dam removal and help them. So in that capacity, I chair the Vermont Dam Task Force, which is a convening organization of scientists, regulators, practitioners, and I'm going to talk a lot about that in this presentation. And then I also work on water policy at the State House, so statewide water policy related to Vermont's rivers. And my title is A Project Manager's Guide to Undamming Rivers. 4 words: collaboration, communication, coordination, and regulation. And I'm sort of going to just take you through that guide and be pretty quick about it because we've got 2 other really good speakers. And with that, I will try and advance my slide. So the Vermont Dam Task Force, there's an initiative that came out of the Vermont Dam Task Force. And the task force was formed in 2000, not by me, but by Brian Fitzgerald, who worked, I took over his position, but he worked for DEC. So I will just say that the state actually ran the Dam Task Force originally. And then when he retired from DEC and moved to VNRC to work part-time, he took over that position. But the initiative of the force is to collaborate, raise awareness, identify derelict dams, and prioritize projects. And since that work has been going on, we've removed over 72 dams from our waterways as of 2024. We had 6 dam removal projects this summer, which was really exciting. So lots of good work. And there's over 1,000 dams in Vermont that we know that are mapped, and many of them are derelict, and there's many that are unmapped. So we have lots more work to do. And I just want to say, American Rivers gave us this recognition. Vermont has removed more dams per capita than any other state. So the Dam Task Force is that collaboration piece, and project selection is the first part of that. And I know we've talked about project selection already, so I'm reiterating a lot of what's been said today in different ways. So that's part of this presentation. But we select projects based on ecological impact. The TNC, Vermont has the TNC screening tool that was developed in 2017 that is a really good tool. It has 17 ecological variables that are used to create a metric of prioritization. It's a stagnant tool. It hasn't been updated. There's a lot of dams that aren't on it, but it's one tool. And when I think of ecological impact, it's aquatic organism passage, flood mitigation, wetlands restoration, and water quality benefits. Hazard potential is another priority. So whether the hazard rating of the dam itself or the actual condition of the dam, those are two separate things that we look at. And of course, we can't remove a dam unless we have owner interest. So we can have the highest ecological prioritized dam, but if we don't have that owner interest, we can't move the project forward. And the strongest projects are those that have partner support. So, immediately in this process, it's gaining that partner support. Who's interested in this project? Is there aquatic organism passage? Those partners have money for this. So some of those partners and other ones are part of the community that have the local knowledge and expertise. So it's really connecting with those people for the long-term benefit of the river. And I will say with the recent flooding in Vermont, both in 2023 and 2024, that timing has been really critical with this work. We have more projects coming towards us than we've ever had, and we can't remove them fast enough. So suddenly there's people who own these dams that don't want them anymore. They're liable if they fail. And they're trying to figure out how to get them out yesterday. And it's like a 3-year process. So timing is huge. Part of the collaboration is defining the project goals. I'm going to use the dam that we removed this summer in Salisbury, Wainwright Mill Dam, on a tributary to the Otter Creek. Halnan Brook is the name of the tributary. But this project came forward to us through Addison County River Watch Collaborative, who's been doing water quality monitoring work in this area. And this dam sits below the fish hatchery, the Salisbury Fish Hatchery, which there is an NPDES permit for the fish hatchery based on the effluent discharge from the hatchery. And it was identified through their monitoring work that potentially this dam is exacerbating the water quality in this tributary. And they had noticed that the tributary, which is a Class B water, so cold water, identified and recognized for the cold water that is known to Vermont streams, wasn't meeting its water quality standards since 1990. So it had been impaired for a while. And Ethan Swift, who's the basin planner who was doing volunteer work for them, brought it forward to the dam task force, and we looked at it first in 2020. So it had that water quality goal as far as improving water quality, hopefully. Fish passage, it definitely was blocking fish passage. We had Vermont Fish and Wildlife come out and US Fish and Wildlife come out and do surveys to get data, like what fish are here, and are they upstream, are they downstream? So there's brook trout and brown trout here, wild populations, as well as obviously there's some hatchery stuff going on above, because the hatchery itself has a couple dams. So fish passage became also a priority. And then with this project, because there's a tremendous floodplain that's been inundated and full of sediment for the past 235 years, removing the sediment behind the dam and reconnecting the river, giving access for the river to its historic floodplain, gives a tremendous floodplain reconnection benefit. So this one has a flood resilience benefit because of that floodplain reconnection upstream, not so much that the actual, if the dam is going to fail, it's going to impact downstream infrastructure or property in this case, but it's that floodplain reconnection benefit for resilience. So those are the project goals with this project. And these are the partners specifically for this project. So many partners, but this is just an example of the people that you want to engage with early and start collaborating with. Markowski is the contractor who was presenting in an earlier session here. They did an excellent job. SLR was the engineer. Trout Unlimited helped us work with the Beaver Dam analogs, so some of the restoration work after the dam was removed. Lake Champlain Basin was a a funder here with NUIPIC, as well as U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service through the Department of Interior. AmeriCorps provided volunteers for this, Addison County River Watch. So Vermont Fish and Wildlife was at the table for this project the whole time, and as well as Army Corps of Engineer. And a lot of the funding also came through FEMA, through the Flood Resilient Communities Fund, which is managed by Vermont Emergency Management. So, and Middlebury College brought their kids out. We had 2 different classes out to this site. So they were a great partner as well as for the community. And the town of Salisbury Conservation Commission had a presentation about the project. So lots of good people. And that communication, so with the collaboration, we moved to communication and developing project support. And I think it's that early outreach with local communities, with the regulators, funders, and scientists that really benefits these projects. Connecting with the neighbors. So you can have the landowner permission, but if you're not keeping the neighbors informed, issues can come up really fast. So keeping the neighbors informed, sharing with them, having community events about it really develops that project support. Explaining the project goals and understanding them. Educating the community on river function, just how rivers work. I feel like that is a big part of this work, and you can't just dive into the dam removal unless people understand rivers. So that's a big part of my work. And listening to what the community has to say and addressing their concerns. So lots of meetings and engaging early and often. Some of the concerns that come up that I'm learning to be more prepared to discuss is the beavers. Everyone loves beavers right now and should. Beavers are amazing. We love beavers too. And these projects often have beaver habitat, and the beavers don't seem to be impacted by our work. In fact, we're restoring habitat for them. Beaver dams are good. We've seen beavers work the night shift while we're working the day shift. So like we're removing the dam in the day, we're putting up sandbags to divert the water, the beavers build onto the sandbags at night, we move the sandbags back, the beavers go the other way. So literally they are just adjusting as we are adjusting. And ultimately we're restoring the stream so that they have more habitat so that they can do more work. So we love the beavers. There certainly can be some short-term impact, but we think overall that's a long-term benefit. There's this concept of people being connected to their pond. They love their pond and they don't want it to turn into a mud pit. And I think a lot of that is changing people's perception a little bit, educating them about rivers, and it's nice to have a river in your backyard as it is a pond, and the wildlife won't disappear. Some of the wildlife species will change, but that's part of the process. Renderings, Laura Wildman showed drawings, can work really well to show people what it could look like, so we do that a lot when we can. People are tied to their historic dam, just the history of the dam, the mill. Maybe the mill was in their family. They like the sound of the waterfall. It's pretty. Those are all really good things. I also think it's really important to think that the dam existed for 200 or 300 years, but there was 10,000 years where a river flowed freely through that area before the dam, and there was people that lived there then, and they used that connected river system for food security and travel, and so thinking about it not just from the perspective of the dam history, but the history before, I think is really important. The waterfall upstream or the waterfall downstream, it won't have fish passage, or fish passage can't be a priority because of the waterfall. That may be true that, the waterfall is a natural barrier for fish, at least during most stages. But I do think just the reconnection of the river, the natural restoration of stream process, and improving that temperature, the dissolved oxygen, lowering that temperature, increasing the dissolved oxygen is long-term benefits for fish. So maybe it's not traditional aquatic organism passage, but it's improving the habitat for the long term. Losing the swimming hole is a big one. And I get that because there's not a lot of places to swim in Vermont and we want our swimming holes, but they're not always going to disappear with the dam removal, and likely there's a natural bedrock feature in that area anyway, so there will be a scour hole eventually after the dam is out, likely. And there's other good swimming holes and natural features upstream and downstream. Invasive species is a big one. How are you going to manage the invasives? Are the invasives going to spread? And having a plan for that is important. And recognizing that those invasives are there now, so this project is not going to exacerbate that because there's so many people looking at it and monitoring it. And the manicured lawn, like we love our manicured lawn, we love that look. So that's going to take time and perception changes, but I think it's we're rewilding these systems, and thinking about those projects in that way and talking about it is really important. And understanding the outcomes of these projects to educate and communicate to the public. So Reconnected Rivers allows for increased species resilience and habitat diversity, restores natural stream process. It reconnects rivers to their wetlands and floodplains. It improves water quality, public safety, and removes liability. It definitely can improve recreational opportunities. They may not be the same opportunities as the pond was, but fishermen can walk and wade up and downstream. There's this connected system. Kayakers could use the whole system. So it's changing recreational opportunities. And it does provide a tremendous amount of community outreach and an improved understanding of how rivers function. And it strengthens partnerships such as the Dam Task Force. So in the dam removal process, there's 2 minutes? Okay, we'll go fast. And Hilary and Ron are going to go into more details on this, but there's a lot of moving parts. We're balancing all of them, and the deal is to keep them all moving concurrently. So have the funding while you're in the design phase. You need to start raising money for the removal phase. Consistent tracking and reporting is really important. You definitely want to save those emails that say you don't need this permit or you need that permit. And don't be afraid to use the media to share the word, spread the word about the project, and delegate. Have your engineers keep minutes of your meeting, and hire them to do construction observation, and engage the volunteers who want to help you. Find ways to have them be there as well. Know the rules as far as regulation. This is the last one, or one more slide. Don't make assumptions, document everything. Apply for your permits earlier than you think. You can be at like 60% design and start applying for those permits because it's going to be a long process. And understand that those permits are designed for development and not always fit in a restoration bucket. So you have to work with the regulators to explain some of the nuances of these projects because they're new to permitting them. And spell it out on plans. This is the list of permits. Angela's giving a presentation in the next room all about permits. Happy to go into detail here, but I don't have time, so maybe for questions. But there's a lot of them. And ultimately, we have a river reconnected and an amazing group of people to work on these projects. And we're so lucky in Vermont to have that collaboration. Thank you. Did I go too long?
Hello, everyone. All right. So my name is Hilary Solomon with the Poultney Mettowee Natural Resources Conservation District. Our office is down in Poultney, Vermont. And that is my intentional dace picture because we talk a lot about trout and trout habitat and salmonids. But of course, there are other fish and aquatic organisms also that these projects help to serve. I'm talking about some of the things we've already talked about today, like partnerships and permitting, but I'm doing it from the lens of working with landowners and being the coordinator of the landowners in the area and trying to get permission to do these projects on private property. So talking about partnerships and permitting in relation to landowner outreach, when ultimately the end result of these projects is, sort of happens behind the scenes in these iterative processes between the permitters, the regulators, and the engineers. And the landowner isn't really involved in that process, but whatever that final outcome is the outcome that the landowner then lives with. I'm not using the little, I think we're good.
Do you want it? It's right there. Do you see it?
No, I think we're good.
Okay.
I think we're good. Okay, sorry, I'm just processing here. So again, we have this sort of wide variety of funders, and they all have their own specific objectives for their funding. Similarly, permitters might work very collaboratively. So Angela with Army Corps of Engineers is a very collaborative permitter, and she will help you sort of shepherd your permit through various processes with other partners. But if you're working with somebody like the town of Dorset and their zoning review board on a floodplain permit that they may not even understand that well themselves, which has a lot of different sort of like requirements in terms of public noticing, certified outreach letters, then you might need to figure out that sort of all those permitting strategies yourself, because they're not used to participating maybe in this type of a process, or it's sort of new to them. And then we have the sort of technical services provider. So if you're lucky enough to have some folks that aren't involved in the project, you see how many people are involved in all these projects. So like Ron Rhodes, for example, isn't in my watershed. He's on the other side of the state. I was able to reach out to him several times especially around the archaeological part of the project, which I had never dealt with before, and get lists of contractors and help and advice. So even people that aren't directly involved with the project, you end up sort of pulling them in also. So that's sort of an overview of what I'm gonna talk about in a little more detail related to landowners, but I'm gonna put it into the context of the projects that I worked on. So I'll give you a quick background about those projects, where they were, why we were doing them, and then we'll kind of go into some of the specifics. So this project came about in 2014 originally. It was a Joint Chiefs project, which was the USDA, NRCS, and Forest Service. They later called it a Landscape Restoration Partnership. And originally, a lot of those were fire projects out west, like fire suppression projects. But we had this project in the Mettowee watershed with some, we were sort of a standalone at that point with all these other fire suppression projects. And these were our goals. And this was a couple years after Tropical Storm Irene, so flood resiliency was sort of something we were talking about more and more. And I'm glad that made it into our goals originally, because we ended up falling back on that goal quite a bit through this project. The Mettowee River runs north-south. There's chronically high bacteria levels. I don't know if you can see the little arrow, little red arrow. In the town of Pollitt, we have a lot of dry wells for septic, so a lot of bacteria. We don't have many buffers along the north-south part of the Mettowee. It's all agricultural lands. There's temperature. There was some temperature monitoring that happened for many years. We'd have sustained summer temperatures in the 70s for weeks on end. A lot of fish kills in the area. Here's a picture of a stretch of the Mettowee. You can see there's not much habitat. It's very flat. There are no riffles. There's no buffer. So this part of the watershed is hot with not a lot of refuge in the summer. And then in that sort of green circle area, we have Forest Service lands. It's much more forested, it's much cooler. We have calcium-rich springs that are coming out of Dorset Mountain, draining down through the Dorset Hollow, and then coming into the warmer part of the Mettowee. But each of those red dots, and I'll show a better picture of this in a second, are barriers to fish passage. So we have this nice little green sort of area that has natural trout fisheries, but it's pretty hard for the trout to make it from the warmer part of the river up into the headwaters. That's a picture from Forest Service land, so it's still pretty young forest up there, but it is forested and lots of spring water. So a lot of people have talked about this data. We had culvert data from 2010, actually, we used the geomorphic compatibility and the AOP compatibility screening. We had the TNC ran their culverts through their data, the tool that folks have been talking about. And then you can see that area we kind of focused in on. So we ended up with 7 barriers that we were removing in that area. And it opens up the Mettowee it opens up most of the Mettowee. There's a waterfall near the New York border, but it opens up most of the Mettowee River for fish passage. And between the main stem and the tributaries, it was about 50 miles. Now that's all connected. These were the specific projects that we worked on. So it's a mix of dams and culverts. And I'm just going to show you a couple of them. Well, you can see our schedule. We started in 2017 with the first project, 2018, things were going along. We thought we were going to have a project a year, except that in 2019, one of our key engineers quit, and it took a long time to replace them. It was somebody working for Trout Unlimited. And then COVID happened, and then we sort of came back from COVID, and all of our funding was hitting their ending deadlines, and we had to hurry. And then the rest of the projects were all kind of in a panic in 2022 and 2023. So this is an example of a culvert this was on a public road. That's the downstream end. Upstream, you can see there's a lot of sediment buildup, and that is the replacement bridge. Now, this is a bridge on a public road. You might notice that there's a wooden guardrail. We're going to talk about that in a second. That does not meet highway regulations, but I'll come back to that. This is another one. Also notice the wooden guardrail. Landowners really like wooden guardrails, even if your engineers really don't. So these were the main partnerships on this project, and I worked on this, doing the outreach on this project collaboratively with Erin Rogers with Trout Unlimited, so she probably has a whole nother list. She definitely had grant sources and funders that I wasn't using. But so our main ones, we worked with Forest Service and NRCS, and they both came to the table with funding, which was great. And NRCS actually provided some funds for direct outreach, like landowner outreach. So I don't know if people know that they do that, but they will do that if they're involved on a project sometimes. So they're a kind of an overlooked source, it seems like. And then Vermont, so we have between those groups and Vermont Rivers Program and Trout Unlimited and Army Corps of Engineers, there are, Fish and Wildlife, so there are engineers who work with all of those groups. So every time you get a set of plans and you're thinking about, is now a good time to go to the landowner with an update? Those engineers review the plans and they usually want changes. So when you come back from that meeting with everybody, you have lots and lots of changes to add to the plans, and they can be pretty significant. Some of our structures went from having like 4 or 5 grade controls to try and keep the river sort of at a set elevation to having 1 or 2 at the end, which really changes the way that river is going to look in that landowner's front yard. Oops. Sorry, getting a phone call. And then you also have, you have groups like, say, the Lake Champlain Basin Program or WUB that are sort of funding the project and have funding requirements a little bit less in terms of asking for things, although we do have a really nice sign from President Biden at one of our sites, care of the EPA. So we did our first outreach. So this is the initial group that was, back in 2025. And we didn't know the landowners at that point. We had 18 landowners that we needed to reach out to. We just went to the grand list. We got all their addresses. We sent them a letter explaining what we were doing and saying we were going to have a meeting. We sent a postcard out then with kind of the details of the meeting, which was, something like, sort of looked like that. And we ended up getting 1 landowner from each of the different structures attending the meeting, which was really lucky because then we sort of had an entree to the other landowners in that group. So several of the structures had 5 landowners associated with them. Most of them had 2 or 3. And we were able to sort of connect with those landowners. And I made a map that had all the parcels on the map, and I would put, like, if we had a successful meeting with them and they were on board, I would make it green. If they were kind of on board but they had some demands, that was yellow. And if they were pretty unsure about it, that was red. And we sort of worked through all those different issues with the landowners to try and get to a point where they all understood the project and were on board with it. So I talked a little bit about this already, that the permitting could be highly variable depending on sort of the group you were working with. And that, so now you've approached the landowner, they understand the concept, they're on board, but you're coming back with sort of iterative updates as to what the project might look like in the end. And we ended up with, in the beginning, the cultural review was all done by NRCS because they were partnered and they had funds in each of these projects. So it kind of happened behind the scenes. Jacob Clay did all of that, and it just happened. But the last couple, which had a pretty distinct cultural elements to them and historic elements, we went through that normally with BDHP and getting an archaeological review. And that was all very much facilitated and helped through Army Corps of Engineers, super helpful. Similarly, the state helped to coordinate like the wetlands visits and the river program visits and stuff. So again, very helpful, trying to help coordinate all those pieces. Town of Dorset was also great and was involved in a lot of the construction pieces. They helped with the, hauling things, moving things, super nice to work with. And also, they didn't run these zoning review board meetings very often. And they actually didn't run them except that I had these 3 projects. So they had to have 3 separate meetings for me because I didn't know they didn't have them very often. So anyhow, that was a lesson learned. We maybe could have done that in 1 meeting. So then in terms of landowner outreach, just trying to figure out like, how do you do that initial outreach? Definitely the Saturdays that I gave up, sort of my personal time and went and did the outreach in the beginning was super helpful. Made a lot of great introductions with these landowners. And then I did always show them the full engineering designs, but we got a lot of questions about like, why are there sets of teeth in the river? Those were the grade controls. Why is, the bridge was going from like 22 feet to 55 feet. What is that going to look like? We spent a lot of time with like stakes and flagging and sort of showing them what that was going to look like. What are the rocks going to look like? Are they going to be white and angular? Are they going to be round? Can my 100-foot tall Norway spruce that's right in the middle of the project, can I save that? And then the wooden guardrails. So we did a lot of arguing with engineers about wooden guardrails. The wooden guardrails that you saw in that first picture, the town actually came and replaced them. We had freeway rated metal guardrails, and the town swapped them out because they got so many complaints about the guardrails. So we did have to work with engineers to try and figure out, like, can we do a highway rated full capacity wooden guardrail because people really want that. Yeah. And then the other piece is sort of thinking in terms of the landowners and how they're going to receive these changes to their property. So does it, in the landowner's eyes, are the risks to them being decreased or increased? So maybe long-term and larger scale, the risks for flood resilience, those risks are being decreased. But to that landowner who's lost a dam and now they have a stream and it's 2 feet deeper and they have stream banks that are eroding now, that to them looks like they have more risk. And then we've had situations where we add a lot of really awesome woody debris, but to the landowner, that just looks really messy. So now they have more trees planted, all this, these treetops in the river, and it looks very messy to them. And so just sort of working through this, educational piece about how this is actually beneficial, and then having them watch that for the next couple of years was great. And then just the educational opportunities. So the iterative meetings with landowners where you can review all this information. I think Karina had a great slide with all the benefits of this work that we're doing. And then as the design plans change, trying to capture some of the design elements in like simpler graphics, whether the bridge company gets you a schematic of what the bridge is going to look like, or you sort of draw something yourself, or you're out there putting pins in where things are going to go, just trying to keep it so it's very visual, very accessible to the landowners, and then trying to sort of involve other groups, like the local historical society in Dorset loved this project. We talked to them multiple times. When we got all of the information from the archaeological review, we put it into a PowerPoint, took it to one of their meetings and presented it all. And I have some of those slides today, but I'm running out of time. But there's very cool things like a person named Experience Barrows, who owned one of the properties originally, and just some neat, cheesemakers and different things going on. And then also, it's been said already, but the local Trout Unlimited chapter, they actually found our final barrier. They did a stream walk up the whole stream, found a barrier that we had missed. It was kind of buried, and that was our 7th. It was one of our dam removals. Yeah, so lots of people involved, and I will just turn it over now to Ron.
Thank you. I think it's clear that we could use an hour for each person, because there is just so much experience and so much to know in these projects. So I'm going to turn over to Ron. Ron, do you think you can teach about 10?
Hello, my name's Ron, and I'm addicted to dam removals. I am. I admit it. Ron Rhodes, Connecticut River Conservancy. I have been the project manager on 29 projects. 23 of those 29 have been dam removals. That tells you something about where my passion lies. I'll do culverts when U.S. Fish calls and says, hey, we need your help, or, if it's related to a dam removal, I'll do one, because sometimes that happens. But that to me is what's the French term? Like, that's where it's at, right? Dam removals are the sexy part of stream restoration. No, not working?
Other way.
All right, I can do it here.
Yeah.
Which one?
Let's try that one.
All right, just going to see my cover photo.
No, we're going to get there. Hold on.
There we go.
Luckily, I can talk, so. All right, so I'm covering implementation. So imagine, close your eyes. You've spent 3 years of your life doing all of the work that Karina and Hilary just told you about. You've got 100% design. You've got your local, state, and federal permits. You have everything. You have your grant funding for implementation. You're ready to go. Now what, right? What do I do? So first thing you have to do is a pre-construction site visit. You need to call your state, what do we call him, river engineer, right? So Josh Carvajal, who's here, or whoever your local engineer is. You have to call Army Corps and say, okay, we're gonna meet on site with the contractor, and you're gonna walk through the plans and the construction sequence and how's this gonna happen, right? You're just gonna blow up the dam and leave? No, I wish we could, but they don't let us do that. So you're gonna notch the dam, then you're gonna take some sediment out, then you're going to come back and notch the dam, right? All of that's going to be discussed. Everybody's going to sign off. I would encourage you to include all of your partners in that meeting. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Vermont Fish and Wildlife, your DEC basin planner, anybody and everybody who has been involved in the project, even the local Conservation Commission. Have them come out. They can listen in, right? It's a great way for your partners to learn and understand how this project is going to happen. They don't have to be there, but it's part of that partnership and communication that you're building that capacity. And hopefully you're going to do more dam removals in that town. Construction timing, we can only do these projects July 1 to October 1. Every once in a while they let us go in, June if it's, dependent on the species. I actually started in 2016. We did the East Burke Dam removal. Even though it was a brook trout stream, we didn't start that project till October 15th. We didn't finish till Thanksgiving, which I wouldn't recommend. But it was, if anybody knows East Burke, huge mountain biking community, right? Their last big race of the year, where there are 200 Canadians in the parking lot, plus another 200 Americans in the parking lot, is October 10th. It's like we can't start the project and not be out, right, by that date. They will kill us all. And so everybody agreed we'd start after that date. So you can get some leeway here and there. Sign and post your permits. It seems like a small thing, right? But invariably, someone's going to come down and go, what the hell are you doing here? Let me see your permit. Why are you here? And the contractor has to sign it. You have to sign it. Post them. It seems like a trivial thing, but somebody will come by and want to see your approval to be there. And if you get clean water block grant funding from the state of Vermont, you got to have your sign posted. Take pictures of it because you're going to need it in your final grant report, right? Have the dam in the background or the excavator in the background. Again, little things that if you don't do it, then when your grant report's due, like now, you're like, oh shit, I got to go drive all the way back there and put a sign up and take a picture of it for my grant report. Just leave it there. Every once in a while, one will get stolen. It's happened to me. We recreate signs for our projects. Says CRC River Restoration Project in process. Every once in a while, someone will steal it. I don't know why, right? So at the end of the day, construction day, like if the contractor has brought a blue outhouse, right? Stick the sign behind the outhouse. Most people aren't going to go over there. Bring it back out the next day, post it again. That way it stays for the whole project. Construction oversight. So I'm not an engineer. I'm not even a scientist, right? I'm a project manager. Now, I've done enough dam removals that I start to get this sense of things, but it's not my plans, right? It's SLR plans or Stone's plans. You have to pay for them to be there during the most critical parts of the dam removal. If you're just slopping sediment out into a truck and driving it off, you don't need to pay them $150 an hour to sit there and watch sediment get loaded in a truck and drive off. However, when you start doing channel reconstruction or adding wood to the stream, or did we go down deep enough, like are we at that 5% slope of the new channel, you have to have the engineer there, right? Engineer and the contractor working together hand in hand. And really that partnership is key. I've had projects before where I felt like a third grade teacher, right? Like making these two private firms work together without screaming at each other. Now, I don't hire those folks anymore because I work with people who are good to work with and that work well together, right? So Ben Canonico's here, Gabe Bolin, who's an engineer. Like, you find your teams and you work with those people in those areas. And we got a large, I work in all 4 states, right? So we're working with different people. If we're in the Northeast Kingdom, that's one set of characters versus Southern Vermont is a whole different, crew that we're working with. But find the folks that work well together. It's going to make your life as a project manager much easier. Visible in the community. So East Burke's a good example. The Passumpsic Valley Land Trust bought that dam in order to remove it. 15 years later, they called me and said, would you help us? Because, they're a land trust, right? They hadn't really done dam removals. And we got it out in 2 years. I spent an inordinate amount of time in East Burke. I don't live in East Burke. I did that year. And I met with every neighbor, every business. And when I had a business that wouldn't meet with me because they didn't like the dam removal project, I went to the other business next door and said, Vince, will you talk to Bob and just tell him to meet with me? Like, I'm not going to bite him or, and so Vince would go talk to his buddy Bob and I'd get my foot in the door and then we could sit down, right? And find out what his issue was. Well, all he wanted was steps, access steps to the brook. So I looked at Roy Schiff and I'm like, all right, can we put access steps on the plans? He's like, sure. I'm like, all right, what was next? What's your other? And he's like, well, what are those red things that you guys plant? I'm like, red oaks or dogwoods? He's like, yeah, I like those. I'm like, done. Like, that was it. It was 2 minor things that, he wasn't really opposed to the dam removal. He wanted something out of it for his business. It was easy. Steps cost like, I don't know, we probably spent $1,000 to put no steps in. No big deal. So be visible, be in that community. We actually did, at the library, which was right across from the dam, we did a public meeting. We had 30% designs. We invited everybody. We were there from noon to 7 p.m. We invited everybody in whenever they could come. We took their input and we made changes to the design based on what the community told us. It really helped, right? I had people saying, I'm going to chain myself to the dam. You're not going to take it. I had one guy say, I'm going to bring my gun. And I got lots of guns. You want me to bring mine too? Like, you're going to hear all this crazy kind of stuff, right? And it's just part of it. You don't get upset by it, right? It's nothing personal. You just deal with them. And you have to be there. And you have to take some of those arrows. We've had neighbors come and yell at us. They're 4 Bud Lights into their Friday afternoon, and they come down and start barking at the contractor. And I'm like, okay, first of all, I wouldn't yell at him. He's in a big yellow machine. He'll bury you in the sediment, and no one will know where you're at. Like, come yell at me, right? If you want to talk to someone, this is my fault, right? So you just have to accept that and know that it's part of being a project manager. even when you're in someone's backyard removing a little dam, the neighbor or someone's going to be upset. I haven't done the dam removal yet, that someone wasn't mad at me for it. So that's sort of the naysayers. The vandalism is unique. We did a project in Wilmington and 2 years ago on Beaver Brook, tributary of the Deerfield. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service was helping us with the culvert part. Joe Saldino, who is here, was a contractor for the dam removal. U.S. Fish brought down a dump truck from the Nalhegan Refuge the day before the project was started. The next morning we were supposed to start, and the brake lines were cut. We had a neighbor who was opposed to the dam removal. So we put up, cameras, we called the police, and then I think it was sometime later that week, he cut, we couldn't prove who it was, but we had one neighbor who was opposed to the dam removal, so it's pretty obvious. He cut a hose line on the excavator. So it's the only time I've had that happen in 29 projects. So, but it could happen, and you just got to be ready for basically anything and everything. Sorry, premature. Communication with partners and funders, we've already talked about it. Early and often, and yes, they can always hit delete if they don't care about that email you just sent them, right? However many people it is, 15, 20, just keep it going. Just, bore them to death with details about the project and where you're at. And because if you don't, eventually someone's going to call you and say, Dave's going to call and say, hey, where are you at in the dam removal? Oh, we finished 2 weeks ago. What? Whether they're a funder or some other partner, just keep everybody in the loop all the time. Media and member events. We do this all the time. We invite media out. It's a way that you get more projects, the more articles you have in the paper. WCAX, Windows in the Wild, whatever. TV, do as much of that as you can. We invite our members because some of our donors are giving money to these projects. So we did, like Blake Higgins down in Saxon's River. This summer, we had a big member event. We had 2 different groups came through, and we gave them a tour of the site. It was after construction. They cut off a little early so we could get our folks in there without, you don't want your people walking in around the trucks coming in and out of the site. So you do have to be worried about safety. Wrap up last day before the contractor leaves and pulls everything off site. Make sure everybody's cool with where it is, right? Your funders, your permit your permit folks, because once they're gone, getting folks back to make some change is going to be hard, and it costs more money. So before you think you're done, I might think we're done, but make sure all your appropriate agency staff have signed off, whether it's in-person visits or a report from your engineer with pictures. You could, like SLR does daily logs, right? And we send that to that email list. So press and grant requirements, that kind of goes back to the pictures. The sign, the before and after picture. Make sure you're standing in the same spot, right? You take looking upstream at the dam before, and then upstream when the dam is gone. Those are great. They help sell that project and future projects to your funders. Monitoring costs, that's a tough one because, a lot of our grants are, 1 year or 2 year grants, and monitoring might be required for 5 years. So the way we do it is we pay the engineer to do that monitoring. We pay them up front. We have an agreement that says they're going to do monitoring and submit those reports for 5 years, or every other year for 5 years. We just pay them in advance out of the grant that we have, because trying to find a grant to pay them 5 years from now, good luck. And if you have that relationship with your engineers, it's not a problem. One thing I missed, change order, budget, right? I've got $400,000 to do this project. I don't have a dime more. We're a nonprofit. We're not a town. I can't put a bond out. So we sign max not to exceed contracts with our contractors. So they know if we find something, oh shit, there's ledge in the middle of the dam that we didn't anticipate. What are we going to do? We're going to have to hammer the ledge out. Well, we didn't plan for that. Yep, I understand. But we got to get the project done. So it's not a hourly rate or a task-based contract, right? You made this bid, it's a max not to exceed contract because that's all we have. Now, we work with the same people on a regular basis, right? Sometimes we have budgets that are tight. Sometimes we have a little more flexibility, right? Like they got to make a profit. They're a private company. We all understand that. Our grantors understand that. But just be careful on your contracts. You can also do it a little different where you can say, if you do your RFP where they bid, basically you say, okay, we might remove 500 cubic yards of sediment and 500 cubic yards of concrete, or, because we're not quite sure, we might remove 1,000 cubic yards of each of those. And they can do a bid on both of those alternatives, right? And if you have the grant money to cover both, what you don't want to end up doing is paying $400,000 if it really should have been a $300,000 project. So you can do a contract that way too. SLR, Jessica and I have done that several times, if you guys have done that, but that's a nice way to give them some flexibility so they don't end up, eating a big chunk of change at the end of the project. All right?
Awesome. Thank you. I know you probably have another slide too, but I think that.
Oh, this is just, pictures.
That's a good
So there's the
picture.
before and the after. I didn't work on that one for 14 years, but it was in the basin plan for that long before we got it out. So don't panic, because not 14 years all the time. Beaverbrook, that's the one I mentioned. Dam removal, culvert replaced with bridge. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service did the bridge. Private contractor did that one. That one only took 6 years of my life.
Materials for that project and for my project.
Dry hydrants. Fun.
We'll do it.
Not really. But you might come across dam removal that has a dry hydrant, and you're going to have to deal with how do you fix that, because it's the only water source in that whole section of town. Megan and I worked on this one together. Not ideal, not what we would love to see on the side of a stream, but if you want to get the dam out, you might have to do something like that. That's just, why we do the work, right? For us, sea lamprey, native, they're not invasive. We love them, even though they're the ugliest damn thing I've ever seen in the river. We love them anyways. Brook trout, obviously, and that's my favorite picture of all time. That's in East Burke. There used to be a dam there. Now there's a girl with her dad going down on a unicorn floaty. You can't get any better than that.
Awesome. One question, and there's a question in the back, it looks like.
Yeah, a follow-up. You talked about like getting your crew together, the people who you like to work with, but as I'm sure you're aware, we have to like all of this because the numbers are so big. So like, how do you kind of square that circle?
You have to follow your procurement policy, right?
Depends on the funder.
We competitively bid everything.
Yeah, but it depends partly on the funder, but it depends on your procurement policy. But, then how do you end up justifying picking the same people every time? How do you get bids from other companies if they know you're going to pick the same people every time?
I guess we don't pick the same people, and we do put it out to
Okay.
bid. So, yeah,
Okay.
that wasn't. We
I
actually
guess maybe I
used different
misunderstood
contractors on most of
kind of
this
what you were
project.
saying about like picking your.
Our procurement policy is a little more lenient. I have to send it out to 3 people.
Right.
I work with more than 3 contractors, so depending on where I'm doing my work, I send it out to those 3 people that I want to work with.
Right.
And whoever comes, like that project we did last year on the Saxons River, we had 3 bids.
Right.
We took the low bid, right? But it was someone we've worked with before and does good work. So that's competitively bid.
No, agreed. Just, sorry, maybe misunderstanding. It sounded like you kind of worked with the same, like 1 or 2 contractors on most of all your projects.
And again, it depends on your funding source.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And usually we have a selection team to review the bids so that, and we have a criteria for how we're going to score it. So everyone sees that in the RFP. And experience does play into that. So that's why we're having this workshop, to get more engineers and contractors some more experience, because we don't want to have the same people.
I do think, to your question, though, that sometimes you have trusted contractors who are willing to do you a favor, and so those maybe are the ones that you might ask, how much do you think this is going to cost? They might bid on it later, but there's no guarantee to them that they would receive the project, but they're sort of part of your circle and might help you cost things out a little bit or do you a favor, and you try to spread those favors out among people so that somebody doesn't have that burden.
Great question. And let's have another round of applause for